For people who've been at ILRI for any time, Brian doesn't actually need any introduction. But there are a number of new people, so it would be good probably to say a few things about Brian. Brian's been at ILRAD and ILRI for 20 years, and he's been a very influential force in the evolution of ILRAD and then ILRI over the years. And let me just highlight 3 or 4 things that Brian's contributed to. He was very important in the movement of ILRI from just being behind its 4 walls in the lab to actually getting out into the field, so the kind of introduction of ILRAD to the developing world. And in introducing epidemiology and socioeconomics to that. He's also been very influential in the whole kind of international thinking about the role of animal diseases and poverty alleviation, and has written a number of influential things on that. He's influenced the new ILRI strategy. He was on the task force that did that. And he's been very influential in some of our new thinking about markets and SPS and how we move on that. So you can see that Brian's made a tremendous contribution over the years to ILRI. And it seemed very important to have some kind of a milestone to this fitting event that Brian will be retiring from the kind of full-time service to ILRI. He won't be ending his relationship with ILRI, but this full-time service at the end of March. And as a kind of milestone for that, and because of Brian's kind of long contributions, as I've said, but his real passion for ILRI, we wanted to capture some of his parting words. So this is the kind of parting words of ILRI to ILRI from Brian. So Brian, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed an amazing pleasure to be asked to give you some rambling thoughts of mine. And John, thank you very much indeed for that kind introduction. For that, let me get straight on. Many people have been entertained by this title, which is basically, as I say with apologies here, to Lewis Carroll. From Alice Through the Looking Glass. He said, time has come, the walrus said, to talk of many things. In the original it said of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings. Now, I've taken a few liberty of bringing livestock, but bringing chameleons and leopards, the concept of changing colour, but not necessarily changing one's inherited characteristics. And so I thought it might be very useful as a title. And the pigs have wings. Well, I mean, the question is, will we reduce poverty meaningfully before pigs start to fly? Which I think people have to think about. Okay, why the seminar? Well, John has partly explained it. Basically, I'm being put out to pasture. At a certain age, one is incompatible with the array. 2 elements of this seminar. Number one, I'm going to try and make a few comments on the positioning of ILRI as a global convener of change in the field of poverty reduction through livestock. And in that part, I actually had written something about 2 weeks ago, and I basically abandoned it yesterday because I felt it would be more appropriate to draw on many of the things that have been said during these few days. And secondly, a slightly more light-hearted view of the dynamics of ILRI and her staff over some 20 years, some personal reflections. Let me start on the more serious side. The key challenges in ILRI's task of bringing together livestock and poverty reduction. And we're faced with these huge weaknesses in developing country capacity that don't allow the optimal exploitation of their amazing livestock resources. And these are human, financial and organizational and of course technical, as we all know. But the other major challenge, I think, is this increasingly divided imperatives of the developed and developing world. And they are, we brought many of them up during this meeting: climate change, the disease control and spread, which is going often to the West, and of course all these international standards that are getting more and more difficult. What are some of the key opportunities? Well, I put three, and I think these are central to our life. The multiple benefits of greater and higher quality market access at all levels, and I think these are amazing. Secondly, and you may think I'm overstating this, but I believe the steadily increasing capacity to secure livelihood assets and reduce vulnerability. I really believe, and we've heard many things these few days that indicate that we're getting better at that. We're recognising the importance of vulnerability and analysing it and doing something about it. And of course, thirdly, the recognised advantage of natural resource conservation. So, the question we all ask is can a small player, very much research orientated, somewhat, depending on your view, unskilled in development issues, and somewhat of an ivory tower, how can we play an optimal role? Not easy. I suggest I put here some of my favourites, but drawn on your favourites, to adding value to other research and development initiatives through fostering greater understanding of the links between the livestock and poverty reduction. This targeting role, I really feel that that's a major opportunity and should be strengthened within ILRI in the future. The targeting role, the gathering of empirical evidence of the poverty-reducing policies and strategies that we are involved in. The third point I put here is very important, and I'm going to come back to that in different aspects, is that the importance of products, a business plan, the choice of regions and partners, and this issue of opportunism versus idealism. We are more and more an idealistic institute, but we should also be thinking of these products and how we can take opportune moments. Animal health has been, as John said, one of my focuses, and I just draw one slide here to say what I think are the important opportunities in animal health, but pro-poor animal health. Four areas. This issue of protecting the very vulnerable and the role of safety nets. We haven't really. This gets well away from traditional veterinary services in many circumstances. You see, the issue of promoting market access at various levels, well, we of course deal with that. Improving productivity, which is, you might say, old hat, and of course improving human health. But the key point here is that these will require a new range of animal health expertise to meet the demands and to complement traditional veterinary skills. And the sorts of things that Jeff Mariner and Chris bring to this in terms of participatory techniques is one example of that. Now, looking at how we have managed this within the CG Livestock Institute, we had Ilka's farming research with tangible international products. And we then moved to ILRAD and the search for vaccine technologies for East Coast fever and trypanosomosis, two diseases, but nevertheless again produced these tangible products, particularly on understanding of the bovine immune system, that were very important. Now our new role, since then, leaping straight into the is the emphasis more on policy, the focus on global public goods, this new geographical dispersion that we're being pressurized into quite rightly, I believe. The devolution of our activities to national and regional partners. And of course, the nice external program and management review endorsement of this visionary and dynamic institute that we now have. I call this the sexy lady. I mean, we look like the sexy lady, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the question is, are we really a new species? Or are we simply the response of the chameleon? Are we changing colours and adapting? Humans really take an awful long time to evolve, and I suggest that we're possibly very much in the chameleon stage. Now, imagine back to the sexy lady. We've got the stage set. We've gone to a concert. We're waiting for the singer to come on, and there it is. This is us. I'm afraid I haven't got beautiful singers, but I've got a beautiful lady polar bear. And she comes on and she's about to open her mouth, and this is ILRI, we all think it's great, but the question is, sexy, good-looking, bright and alert, but can the lady sing? And that's the key question that many people are going to be asking. So in other words, beauty and art are in the eyes of the beholders. And as I say, hey, EPMR teams come and go, but the rest of our major stakeholders are here for a long time, and they have rather more synthesized, possibly, views as to where we are and where we're going. And some of these important ones are the Science Council, the need for the science and the outputs, the CG as a whole, and the need to think about funding, the donors, one with this agenda, one with that agenda, our national and regional partners who maybe have other agendas, and of course the international agencies such as FAO, and they all have different views, and they don't necessarily all see us as the sexy lady. And I'll come back to FAO in a moment. So how well does our new model respond to these varying demands of these and other clients? And just thinking of the production systems side of that, not our partners, we have a variety of people out there and clients with very different understandings. We've still got some hunter-gatherers around in the world with their views. We've got the more pastoral systems. We've got the smallholder mixed agricultural systems. We've got the more commercialized dairying, the smallholder dairying in Kenya, and we've got the more intensive, all out there. Now, we have to be able to communicate with those. We have to be able to put our mission over to those. Can we do that? The clear message I'm saying is, in this business of these partnerships, that's our business now. Communication is paramount, and two particular aspects of communication. So we now have a smart approach. We think we're pretty bloody good, and we've got this idea. But in leadership, we've got to be leading and making sure that others are there. They're with us. We're not walking out in front and, oh dear, they're behind. So leadership, so it's understanding of all those other groups that I was talking about is absolutely critical. Awareness of the need to interact with many of the traditional disciplinary-based organisations, and they're not just ones that are old-fashioned and a national veterinary services or something. Some of the big international organisations also have that characteristic. And so messages explaining our contributions are absolutely essential, and particularly as we go out into new horizons and new territories and try to convince people that we're the right people to do business with. And of course, in that, just to remind you that there are many politicians involved in it, and politicians like simple messages. I've got this one with the cryptic, and then this relationship with our key international partners is critical. I'm going to spend a little moment on this, and there emerges in a rather fuzzy image FAO. I believe FAO is an absolutely critical partner, and I really believe that we haven't got our act together with FAO, or FAO hasn't got its act together with us. I feel that that is a real challenge. This is a leading implementational organisation. We have relations with individuals, but we should be in a much stronger partnership. So I just use that as an example of one of these where I do feel that there is a misfit. Okay, I am attracted very much to this, the DFID pillars of pro-poor growth. Now, Carl and I have used this in a recent paper because I think it actually nicely fits in to our pathways. I mean, I think there's been some iteration backwards and forwards. So the four pillars are: number one, creating strong incentives for growth. So this is the big picture, the right environment, the peace, the stability, and incentives for growth, and the role of the private sector. Secondly, this fostering international economic links, access to technology, managerial skills and markets, so links internationally helping bring things in and exchange ideas in all directions, and the learning process by the developed partners. and of course speeding knowledge transfer. The third one is this broad access to assets and markets, and that is very central to ILRI, the aiding distribution of the benefits from growth, harnessing countries' labour and initiative. And lastly, the risk and reducing risk and vulnerability. And again, that's central to our programme, enabling the poor to engage in economic activities that are riskier but more profitable. So I really like this. Another thing I really like, which is the 6 big issues. Now, the other night in the bar, in a discussion with Bruce, we were discussing the geographical dispersion of ILRI. Bruce, is Bruce here? Yeah. And one of the points that Bruce made was, look, we did that study a few years ago. We know where the poor are, and that's where we're going to go. We've got to be constantly revising where we are going and how we're going. Okay, we've got to have clear programs and messages, but we need to be thinking how we can mould those, use what we've done and build them and move them forward. I like these 6 big issues. First of all, they were raised as funding opportunities, and they are compelling, in my view, as funding opportunities. Secondly, I really believe that they have lots of appeal as operational areas, particularly as we move into this new, wider geographical mandate. And thirdly, they build on our traditional pathways. I'm going to put them up there just to remind you. They build on our pathways. There are some of our pathways in there. But most importantly, and I think this is one of our failings, is that they bring livestock to this broader development agenda. The word livestock doesn't appear in these big issues, but there are all sorts of other issues in them. So they are smallholder assets and vulnerability, the market access. We've been through these. The production intensification, and the first 3, of course, are parts of our themes. The special needs of pastoral areas, the impacts of climate change, and the need to respond to emergencies. I've actually changed the avian flu to the need to respond to emergencies because I think that is where we might move. So I think, as I said, these are compelling, and I really feel that they, even from an operational point of view, if anyone in ILRI can contemplate changes in our operational structure. Let me put this little idea forward. So I believe, as an example of this, the need to apply poverty reduction mechanisms context to engaging both the policy and the development actors. Now I'm going to use an example of animal health. So I'm going to say, let's look at our pathways, protecting assets and reducing vulnerability and promoting market access. We already know that some certain diseases we can put in some of these pockets. So Newcastle disease, for example, is a big thing on protecting assets and reducing vulnerability. Of course, it's also got a little bit some market access issues. Avian flu is a little bit of both. Rabies clearly is there. Cysticercosis, some vulnerability, but a huge thing on marketing. East Coast fever more in the vulnerability of where it occurs. So that is simplistically putting diseases there. However, if we then start to apply this at a regional level and put a production systems context into this, so let's look at the pastoral systems in the Horn and then do our same little pathways on which diseases fit. So we've got Rift Valley fever in the Horn, possibly foot and mouth with all the exports, and our mixed crop livestock in southern Africa, Newcastle disease clearly emerging, tick-borne diseases, and then on the trade we've got foot and mouth again. And one could go on and doing this process. However, the next really is trying to think of if we are thinking of our partners, both in terms of the policymakers and the implementers at both ends of the spectrum. So we're in the business of, they are all in the business of protecting assets and reducing vulnerability. And these are our systems. Our disease is just one of those constraints. We've got the climate shocks, and we've got the water access, and we've got the service provision. And so what I'm saying is that both at the sharp end, but also at the policy end, we need to have a much greater integration with all these different players if we're going to be successful. It's no good the disease people walking in there all on their own and trying to be successful necessarily. And of course also exactly the same in the promoting market access, although some of your columns are going to be different, looking at input markets and output markets in those different environments. In summary, the need to put our livestock, market, vulnerability, animal health and other issues into a much broader development and natural resource context. Interest in the impact of your research on policy. Now this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about research outputs to policy outcomes, because this is something that we have touched on a little bit this week, but I think is absolutely critical. And if once you publish that paper, isn't that good enough? I mean, come on. I mean, you can put it in the MTP, and we've got that as an output. I think for most people, but not all, it is rather aspirational, of course. I mean, how? Do you not remember that paper I had? It must have had, you know, someone really must have changed their mind as a result of that. It had that great, that great impact. Well, sometimes yes, sometimes. But so, should we not be able to translate this aspiration into more institutional mechanisms to ensure that we have this impact? And so we need to start to be thinking about, well, what is needed to do that? Is it just having one person on the project that has to be thinking about what next, and, or I hope it's a bit more complicated than that, but that's a good start. Whose job is it? What is involved in doing that? And for which types of research is it relevant, and which types not? Let's sort of let's tease that out and be much clearer on this. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and these are some that I took from a paper that Illusion and I gave to the work just a few weeks ago. One, the rinderpest control. Now, the rinderpest control was in Africa was totally top-down. It was decided that rinderpest shall be eradicated. So it was a top-down initiative. And JP15 went on for several weeks, 1975 and 77. Then it re-emerged in Mauritania, and the rinderpest control came up, and the PACE program. Then, my question is here, did the participatory approaches that were brought in at the last minute save the day? It was, and this is a lot from Jeff Mariner and Kees van Kleister and other people who were working on that, the persistence of infection in the Afar region and the need to change from this blanket immunization, which was the program there, into much more strategic vaccination focused on the Afar region where the problem was. And then the introduction of participatory epidemiology approaches to try and understand where disease was and then focus in on those. And initially I put from heresy to acceptability, because originally in the PACE program, long before your day, of course, it was thought of as being somewhat heretic, but has been accepted still with some controversy. And then, as a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, I say at the end, did livestock keepers really want to have rinderpest eradicated? Another one which I put in a lesson in research to policy failure is the East Coast fever control by infection and treatment. Now, you all know about infection and treatment, which is the idea that you have these, you inject these sporozoites in, so you have stabilized from infected ticks, storage in straws, Symptones umbrella with antibiotics, they go in there, you need to monitor. It was developed over 25 years ago, David Radley and others, but not widely used. Some possible contributors to the failure, it was very much owned by researchers. And all these wonderful researchers who, of course, as they often do, niggled and said, well, my work is more important than yours, and you have forgotten this and forgotten that. So was it too much influence placed on different strains, etc.? There was very little dialogue with the end users as to what they wanted. They were crying out for something. Did the breakup of the East African community affect that, and the Maguga facility? There was no dialogue with the private sector at all. And of course there were also ownership issues within some of the institutes involved. So frankly it was a lesson that we should learn from a lot, and I'm very happy to say there is this new initiative with Galvmed that is trying to address some of these issues. I very much like this policy, research and policy and development rapid analytical framework that has been produced by ODI, the Overseas Development Institute in the UK. I think it's really a nice thing for us to think about in our policy, is our research outputs to policy outcomes. The political context, all the political and economic structures, the evidence, which is a lot of our role, and of course the links between policy and research communities, and then bearing in mind that there are always these external influences on this. Then when you start to transfer that into these interfaces, you see that there are certain roles that we could play. So you've got the politics and policy making, the research, learning and thinking, and the media advocacy. But the interfaces are all relevant to us. The policy analysis and research, bringing the politics and the research together. The scientific information exchange and validation side. And last but certainly not least is the campaigning and the lobbying. So these are all, I really like this, and this is ODI's thinking, but I just thought it was useful to share. I'm going to now move to the second part, which is more a little bit lighter, which is looking at the dynamics of ILRI and her staff over 20 years. And as John said, I mean, I started my life, and these are pictures from those days, here in Ethiopia, in some 30 years ago, involved in this rinderpest control and doing all sorts of other things too. But my days in the CG system started with ILRAD, and here we have the triumvirate that were brought in to restore order to the ailing institute that had been started with the help of Rockefeller funds, and Jack Doyle, Ross Gray and Roger Rowe. Roger, by the way, always had that smile on his face, even when he was giving you really serious messages. He did. And a little title that Ross Gray was given was The Sheep in Wolf's Clothing. Normally it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, but Ross had, his bark was very loud, and he would suddenly do all sorts of things, but underneath, most people, but not all, believe that he had a heart of gold. Jack Doyle, who was the director of research, and I've written Intellectual Brilliance in the Bunker. Jack spent a lot of his time, most of his time in the bunker. There was an advantage that in the early evening you could go and catch him in the bar if you wanted to, and many people did. Now, in the bunker, am I being critical? So I put here, do the demands of the job make it a bunker-based operation? I'm looking at 2007 here, not looking at any particular direction. But thinking as, you know, looking at issues of the leopard and its spots, in seriousness. ILRI is, I started off there, and we then moved to there, we then moved to there, and then moved to there, and now we're finally there. And it started with this little group, the ILRI Socioeconomics Program, started by the Rockefeller Foundation in 1987. Barbara Grandi, Margaret, our secretary, Adrian McKelvey, Pierre Lassard, who came in, he was my PhD student at the time. And that Lab 8, which was the third place, was opened by Ross Gray and the Swiss who financed that, I might say. And here we have Jack and Adrian and others. In those early days, a really important player as far as we were concerned in starting that program was Bill Thorpe. Bill Thorpe, I actually believe Bill Thorpe is, his contributions to ILCA and ILRI are grossly understated and possibly under-recognised. Bill has been exactly the sort of person that the Institute is now seeking in terms of this leadership and partnership and facilitation. We started this work down at the Kenya coast with CARI, ILCA and ILRAD, and sort of was the initiation of this work that we did on endemic stability, having to tick-borne diseases in various parts. And this picture, nice picture, by the way, comes from Stella Masawi, who's in the room, who was looking at East Coast fever risk in the region. And young Subhash here, looking very young. He had a little bit more hair and not so grey. And Subhash, of course, played a very important role in the tick-borne diseases. And I was here pulling his leg at the fact he was trying to compete with me in growing a beard. Then we had the other players, and again some of these lovely cartoons from Declan McKeever. Dear Alan Young, who was the last real authority on the dynamics of Tellurian power. John Young, who really looked like that, or looks like that, beautifully captured. And John was the complete science whiz-kid, buried in the labs at all times of the day and night. Declan also did this lovely picture of Peter Doherty, who of course was the chairman of our program committee on ILRAD, and he even had the cheek to do one of me. Interestingly, the last external review of ILRI, the EPMR there was a certain gentleman who's sitting in the second row there, who was on that, who sort of said, epidemiology, right, what we really need is some quick and dirty economics. We don't need to know the science behind what's going on. We need to, that's why I put EPMR team members, is a subtle way of describing that it was Carlos on there. So he said, for goodness sake, get rid of epidemiology. And actually, he was absolutely right at that time. I believe that he was right. Luckily, ILRAD didn't take any notice of it. Or life might have been quite different. But at that time, we had one economist, and here we were trying to put diseases in context. The merger with ILCA, of course, gave us far too many economists. We've been struggling with that ever since. So then what happened? ILRI was born. So first of all, looking like this, which is I've always described as the gibbon in the cage, and then we moved on to that one. And then, guess what? We had the arrival of ILCA Man to look after us, so coming directly from one institute to the other. And what fun that was. Ironically, Hank and I are working together on a project. From our point of view, we then became the Systems Analysis and Impact Assessment Group, which was actually the start of the Theme 1 in those days, which has luckily gone a long way, much further from what we were. So looking at production systems focus, strategic research, whither the institute, which systems, which species. So we started to think in these terms, and then looking at strategies and policies for delivery, adoption in impact. However, heavy-duty politics at that time in this transition, and so that little systems analysis and impact assessment group, which I led, was then divided into three. And I might say that the three, which started off very small, all three grew in size and in capacity and in product, which is rather nice. So we had systems analysis, which Phil Thornton then moved into taking over. We had livestock and the environment, and Robin in the back there took over that, and epidemiology and disease control, which I did. And then we came into this era of the epidemiology and disease control, and you recognise a few familiar faces here. Andrew Derry, who's gone, Henry Chiara, and of course this young man, John McDermott, and Tom. And I'm going to come back to them in a second. Then the changing of the guard, and in came Carlos, and introducing new personalities, new ideas, and I've written notes here to make sure I don't sort of mess it up. Carlos and I think, have had a very functional relationship. I always described it, and to many present in the room and externally, describe Carlos as a breath of fresh air. And I still maintain that. I think you know, I'm not the sycophantic type. And I've always had the highest respect for him. We're both, I think, dedicated people. We're both possibly emotional people and committed people. So then, but this is a very personal thing. At that sort of stage came this, and also in the previous merger, this sort of issue of science versus management and destiny and evolving forces. I was a young scientist. I was doing reasonably quite well. In the era of ILRAD, I was the equivalent of one of the 3 or 4 directors, and I had that role for whatever it was, 5, 6, 7 years, and it went very well. Then then in came Hank. And then, clearly, what I describe here is the rise of the sycophants and the marginalization of the conscientious objectors. And I was... I don't know whether that captures it for anyone else. But I was one of the conscientious objectors, and so Haile Selassie also used to do this, as other political leaders. Haile Selassie used to post people to the Afar or somewhere like this. But then we've now moved into the new ILRI and the era of political correctness. I characterize it on. Now, Carlos. So here I had already suffered at the hands of Hank because I was too outspoken and one of the conscientious objectors. Carlos, you could always tell whether Carlos is thinking positively or his expression gives it away immediately. So I pulled this photograph out and captured it there because the problem that I had is in a PC environment, leadership and outspoken polo players that just do not go together, and I'm afraid that was me. So. But however, the saving grace was and I put this down here, I believe Donald O'Hare, and I don't know this, but Donald O'Hare, who I've always respected, and I very much admire the way Carlos has brought him in from the outside regularly to look at ILRI management. I believe that Donald O'Hare said, okay, well look, Perry's going to be a bloody liability in many cases, but for goodness sake, he might be able to contribute something. So, how are you going to cope with that? So there was a brief appearance of this livestock resources group, and I put group because you see the group standing right there. Anyway, it didn't last too long, and then the market scheme and Chris Delgado came in, and Chris very kindly asked me to be part of that group. So my retrospective synthesis of this is we had an era of basic research, which was sound science products, but totally unsustainable within the changing CGI environment. We then had a botched integration period with a loss of confidence, but many opportunities for entrepreneurial pockets to thrive, and I believe that's when John, Tom and I, for example, and Robin and Phil Thornton and others, and the small hog dairy that were able to do that. And we now have this new paradigm of poverty reduction pathways. The stunning blonde that I mentioned before of the CG brings renewal of confidence. Let me some low spots of the last 20 years, and I've got here the dreaded APM, the cocktailed endless diatribes from the front, and serious hangovers. Now, if you look at this picture, look at Asagi. I mean, he's totally asleep. And then you look at that little chap stuck in the back there, John, who's sort of thinking, where else could I be? But most important, I want to emphasize, is some high spots. Now, my wife said, please remember they're personal high spots, because for many people in the audience, they won't be high spots for them. First of all, the people of ILRI, and that is seriously and genuinely a major high spot, because over these 20 years, I have come across some amazing people, and that's captured in this picture. Some more individual ones. There have been two major occasions in which I believe that the sum of the product has been infinitely greater than the sum of the parts. This was one, and this was this partnership between myself, Alan Young, and Andy Norval on the epidemiology of theileriosis. And it was just an amazing process, and we all had so much fun, and I think got produced so much more. The second one I've got here is I'm not now talking about the greater than the sum of the parts. I'll come back to my second one in a minute. The second one was the ISVI 94. We organised this international, it's a Society for Veterinary Epidemiology and Economics. The Kenyans amongst you will remember, or will recognize Simeon Niachai here, who's still actively engaged in politics. He was their Minister of Agriculture. And dear Lucy Kirori, who was my secretary at that time and is still working hard as administrative support. A high spot was our nomination, the USAID funded project in Southern Africa on Heartwater, with all these different institutes, and we were nominated for ILRI, but we didn't get it in the CG. Now this is the other greater than the sum of the parts, which was the combination over several years between John, Tom and myself. And there were many products, and it was a great partnership in which we were all had brought different things to the table, and this was one of those. Now, John I've known for a long time. John came originally to CEDA, a supported project at the university, and came over and asked if I would help be an external reviewer, and we linked in with various masters and other students, and I've always had a very nice, constructive, collaborative, productive relationship with John. But John sort of went, then he went upwards. You know, okay, Thomas. Then you got Tom, and again, Tom, I always admired and respected Tom. Tom came in from Rice, and he came in knowing nothing about livestock. He brought his first task when he arrived. I said, I've got to give this paper on the economics of disease control generally. Would you like to be part of that? Tom then buried himself for 2 months in all the economics papers and did an absolute fantastic job. At the end of our group, Tom, I don't know, Tom sort of, I think he then went, he's a little bit like Ian Smith. Ian Smith, as you know, declared this unilateral Declaration of Independence, UDI. You remember the days of not in 1,000 years are we going to have a black government in Rhodesia. Now, I don't know whether Tom translated it and never in 1,000 years am I going to join Theme 3. But I'm happy to say that I understand that he might be becoming more involved in Theme 3, and maybe the last laugh will be in him, because Theme 2 has disappeared, so he probably, even if he joins the markets theme, it'll probably be Theme 2. So, so he went this way. I mean, other ones that we had have been the partnership with FAO on the SBS issues, which was very nice. It was nice to get this Outstanding Scientist Award, and you notice here it was also rather fun to say hello to Robert McNamara. Apart from his political background and his intellectual strength, it was also quite nice, because I don't know, he was sort of in his 80s, and I think he just married a 30-year-old or something like this, so quite impressive. Susan Macmillan I put up here. Susan has been so supportive, but as have many, and I don't like to introduce individuals into this, but Susan has always been thinking about the communications role, and as I said, that is one of my points that I think is very important. My colleagues in Central America, Edwin and Federico here, and all their products that are emerging from that region. Our recent global roadmap from India, which is now going to turn into this report, which will be launched in FAO on the 17th of April. And then this continuing, this is my last thing from ILRI, the bigger one, looking at this poverty reduction in animal health. Now, just the last moment. This is my father on the left-hand side, who I've always respected a great deal. This is rather fun. This lovely old car. This was at a hunt somewhere in Norfolk. He said to me, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." So I've tended to, as you probably know, I mean, this was taken in 1974 at the last race meeting at what used to be Jan Hoy Meadow, and this is me crossing the finishing line. Now, whether all the other horses were here, I'm not going to tell you. This is Jan Hoy Meadow, and this is when my wife and I went back 2 years ago to have a look, and you can see it. But amazingly, the steward's box is still there. Whether it's a National Heritage Monument, I don't know. I got heavily involved in many years in show jumping and eventing, and more recently in polo. In fact, even we won this 8-goal tournament in the Kenya Open last year, and you add all the other ages up and you still don't come anywhere, do you? But there are problems, as you probably know. So occasionally interferes with these are polo balls, and occasionally even problems in the... I want to finish on the note to say thank you very much. I have got, you've seen pictures of my wife. I'm lucky enough to have two delightful daughters who I will be able to possibly spend more time with in the future, and I very much look forward to that. I'd like to thank you all for your support, and this is, the lights are still on in the evening. Thank you very much.